A poor 6-year-old girl tugged at the iron gate of the Whitmore estate, her tiny voice trembling in the cold autumn air. "Get me a sandwich," she called, her words surprisingly bold for someone so small. "And I'll give you something you've been praying for." Inside the sprawling mansion, 65-year-old Judge Eleanor Whitmore froze in her motorized wheelchair. The stern, silver-haired woman hadn't been spoken to like that in years, certainly not by a child. She wheeled closer to the window, her piercing blue-gray eyes narrowing as she spotted a frail little girl on the other side of the gate. Aurora, though Eleanor didn't yet know her name, looked half frozen, her tattered green coat 2 sizes too big and her wool hat slipping over her messy brown curls. "And what, pray tell, could you possibly give me?" Judge Whitmore muttered to herself, pressing the intercom. The girl's reply was so soft Eleanor had to lean closer to hear it. "I can make you walk again." Eleanor laughed, the sound was sharp, humorless, and filled the empty halls of the mansion like a ghost. "You're joking, child, I haven't walked in 8 years, the doctors told me it was impossible, my spine is dead." But Aurora didn't flinch, her small hands gripped the iron bars like she was holding on to life itself. "My grandma used to say nothing is impossible, she told me that before she went to heaven. I believe her, and I believe you want to walk again." Something in that small, clear voice cut through the judge's cold shell, slicing deeper than she expected. "How do you even know who I am?" Eleanor asked, suspicious now. "Everybody in Millbrook knows Judge Whitmore," the girl replied simply. "You're the lady who puts bad people in jail." "And what are you doing here at night?" Eleanor pressed. "Looking for food," the child said plainly. "Mama hasn't eaten in 2 days, me neither. I smelled bread, please just a sandwich, then I can help you." The wind howled around them, tugging at Aurora's coat. Eleanor stared at her long and hard. She had seen liars, con artists, and manipulators in every courtroom from here to Chicago, but this girl, she didn't look like a liar. And yet, the idea was absurd. Miracles were for storybooks, not for federal judges who lived alone with their pain and their regrets. Still, something in her heart, something she hadn't felt in years, stirred. "Fine," she said at last, her voice gruff. "But when nothing happens, you will eat and then I'll call someone to take you home. This is no place for a child at night." Eleanor pressed the gate release. She watched through the security camera as the little girl trudged up the long stone driveway, leaving tiny footprints in the wet leaves. When Aurora finally stood at her front door, Eleanor got her first close look. The girl was even smaller than she'd thought, her cheeks red from the biting wind, her lips trembling from hunger. "Come in before you freeze," Eleanor said, pulling the door open with her wrinkled hands. "But don't think for 1 second that I believe this nonsense about walking again." Aurora stepped inside, wide-eyed at the sheer size of the mansion. The high ceilings, gold-framed portraits, and marble floors made her look even tinier, but she didn't gape at the wealth around her for long. Her eyes went straight to the kitchen, where half a loaf of sourdough bread and a plate of sliced turkey sat on the counter. "May I?" she asked, her voice timid now. Eleanor nodded, watching as the child made herself a sandwich with small, clumsy hands. She didn't eat it right away. Instead, she turned to face Eleanor. "May I touch your legs?" Eleanor blinked. "What?" "My grandma said healing starts with touch. May I touch your legs?" The judge almost laughed again. This was ridiculous. And yet the girl's eyes were so steady, so certain that Eleanor found herself wheeling closer despite every logical part of her brain screaming not to. "You may," she said finally, her voice low, "but when nothing happens you will eat and I will drive you home." Aurora knelt beside the wheelchair, her small hands resting gently on Eleanor's knees. The judge braced herself for nothing. But then it happened. A spark, not painful but electric, shot through Eleanor's legs, up her spine and into her chest. For 8 years she had felt nothing below her waist. Now suddenly she felt warmth. Her breath caught in her throat. "This is impossible," she whispered. Aurora smiled, a small knowing smile. "Not impossible, just a miracle." Eleanor's gnarled hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. She hadn't felt her knees, her calves, her toes in nearly a decade. Now she felt something, faint, yes, like a whisper, but it was there. "Do that again," Eleanor said hoarsely. Aurora nodded and pressed her palms more firmly against the judge's knees. This time Alina gasped aloud because she was sure she felt her right foot twitch. Tears burned in the corners of her eyes. She hadn't cried since her husband's funeral, but now they slid down her wrinkled cheeks unbidden. "How?" she whispered. "How is this happening?" "Because you want it," Aurora said softly, "and because I believe you can." Alina stared at the girl. She didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. "Eat your sandwich," she said finally, her voice shaking, "and tell me your name." "Aurora," the girl said between bites, "like the lights in the sky." Alina gave a small, humorless chuckle. "You're as strange and bright as those lights, little one." Aurora finished the sandwich, then stood and brushed the crumbs from her coat. "I'll come back tomorrow night," she said. "Tomorrow?" Alina asked. "Why?" "Because this is just the beginning," Aurora replied. "You don't just wake up from 8 years of being paralyzed in one night. We have to keep trying, every day." And before Alina could argue, Aurora was already at the door, stepping back into the stormy night. Alina sat in silence for a long time, her hands trembling. She could still feel her legs tingling. The sensation was faint, but it was there. And for the first time in 8 years, Judge Alina Whitmore, the woman who had sentenced hundreds to prison, the woman who had spent almost a decade as a prisoner in her own body, felt something else she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. She wheeled herself to her bedroom that night and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. The tingling in her legs hadn't gone away. Could it be real? Could she truly walk again? Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow we'll know. But Alina had no idea that tomorrow would bring more than hope. It would bring a storm of people, of danger, of secrets, and a revelation that would shatter everything she thought she knew about miracles. The next evening, Judge Alina Whitmore sat in the grand living room of her mansion, staring at the front gate through the security monitor. The world outside was dark, wet, and quiet. But inside her chest, her heart pounded like a gavel. She hadn't told anyone what had happened the night before, not her doctor, not her caretaker, not even her closest friend from law school who still called every Sunday. How could she? They'd think she had lost her mind. And maybe she had. Because all day, the strange warmth had stayed in her legs. It wasn't just a phantom sensation anymore. She could feel her blanket brush against her calves when she was in bed. She could feel the cold air on her feet when the caretaker opened the window. It was real. She hadn't dared to hope in 8 long years, and now she was terrified that the little girl wouldn't return. But at precisely 7:15 p.m. there she was, Aurora, trudging up the driveway again, her small form barely visible through the drizzle. Her coat was even wetter tonight, her shoes squishing against the stone path. When Alina opened the door, she tried not to sound too relieved. "You came back." Aurora smiled a shy, tired smile. "I said I would." "You shouldn't be walking around at night in this weather. Where are your parents?" Alina asked, wheeling back to let her in. Aurora hesitated, then said quietly, "Mom is sick, she doesn't leave the house anymore. Papa doesn't live with us." Alina noticed how the girl's eyes darted away as she spoke. She could tell there was more to the story, but she didn't press, not yet. "Come to the fire before you catch your death," Alina said, pointing to the hearth. "Did you eat today?" Aurora shook her head. With a soft sigh, Alina rolled into the kitchen and made another sandwich, this time adding a slice of cheese. When she brought it to Aurora, the girl smiled gratefully. But before she ate, she knelt again beside the wheelchair. "May I try again?" Alina swallowed hard. "Yes, please." Aurora's hands were cold as ice when she placed them on Alina's knees. But the warmth returned almost instantly, spreading up Alina's legs like a wave. This time, Alina didn't just feel something, she saw it. Her right foot moved, just slightly but enough that she gasped. Aurora grinned. "You see, it's working." Alina covered her mouth with a trembling hand. "Do it again." Aurora pressed harder, her small face full of focus. Alina felt both feet twitch now, and she laughed, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't made since before the accident. "Oh dear Lord," Alina whispered, "I thought I would never feel this again." Aurora let go and sat back on her heels. "It's not just me," she said softly. "It's you too, you have to want it." Alina nodded, tears filling her eyes. She did want it more than she had ever wanted anything. But before she could speak, the doorbell rang. Both of them froze. Elena rarely had visitors this late. With a frown, she wheeled toward the front door and checked the camera monitor. A man stood on the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a soaked trench coat. His face was half hidden under a hat, but something about his stance made Elena uneasy. "Stay here," she told Aurora firmly. She unlocked the door only halfway. "Yes." The man looked up and Elena's stomach twisted. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 30s, with sharp cheekbones and a scar running along his jawline. "Good evening, Judge Whitmore," he said, his voice smooth but strangely cold. "I need to ask you a few questions about a child." Elena's pulse quickened. "What child?" The man glanced past her, as though he could sense Aurora standing just out of sight. "A little girl, brown hair, green coat. I was told she's been coming here." Elena stiffened. "Who are you?" "My name is Samuel Kane," the man said, pulling out a worn badge. "Private investigator." "What business do you have with this girl?" Elena asked, her tone sharp. "That's between me and her family," Kane said smoothly, "but it's urgent that I find her." Elena's instincts, honed over decades in the courtroom, screamed that something wasn't right. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kane," she said curtly, "I can't help you." Kane's eyes hardened. "You do know where she is, don't you?" Elena narrowed her gaze. "Good night, Mr. Kane." She shut the door, locked it, and turned the deadbolt. Her hands were shaking. Aurora stepped into the hallway, her face pale. "Who was that?" "Someone looking for you," Elena said grimly. "Do you know him?" Aurora's lips trembled. She shook her head, but Elena noticed the fear in her eyes. "Tell me the truth, Aurora," Elena pressed gently. "Why is a private investigator looking for you?" Aurora hesitated, then whispered. "Because Mama says we have to hide. She says if they find us, they'll take me away." "Who will take you away?" Elena asked, her voice softening. Aurora didn't answer. She just wrapped her arms around herself and stared at the floor. Elena wheeled closer and placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "You're safe here tonight," she said firmly. "No one will take you away while you're in my house." Aurora nodded, but her small body was still tense. That night, after Aurora had eaten and drifted off to sleep on the couch, Elena stayed awake, staring at the faint movement in her legs. For the first time in years, she felt like her life had meaning again. This child, this strange, brave child, had given her back more than feeling. She had given her back a reason to fight. But Elena couldn't shake the image of Samuel Kane standing in the rain. Who was he really? And why did Aurora's family have to hide? She looked over at the girl sleeping peacefully by the fire. "Whatever this is," Elena whispered to herself, "I won't let anyone hurt you." But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Because miracles didn't come for free. And whatever Aurora was hiding, it was big enough to send a man like Kane to her door in the middle of the night. Morning sunlight streamed into the Whitmore mansion, glinting off the marble floor. Judge Elena Whitmore hadn't slept much, but she didn't feel tired. She felt alive. Aurora was still curled up on the couch under a knitted blanket, her tiny frame rising and falling with each breath. Elena sat nearby, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She couldn't stop staring at her legs. Because last night hadn't been a dream. When she woke before dawn, she'd willed herself to move her toes, and her right big toe had twitched. Not much, just the tiniest jerk, but enough to make her gasp out loud. It was real. 8 years of doctors telling her it was impossible. 8 years of learning to live with a dead body from the waist down, and now she had proof that something had changed. But along with the joy came a gnawing unease. The man from last night, Samuel Kane, he hadn't felt like just a random investigator. There had been something threatening in the way he'd stood there, dripping wet, staring into her house as if he already knew Aurora was inside. Elena sipped her coffee, deep in thought. When Aurora stirred awake, rubbing her eyes, Elena greeted her with a small smile. "Good morning." "Good morning," Aurora mumbled, sitting up. "I made pancakes," Elena said, nodding toward the kitchen. Aurora's eyes lit up. "Really?" "Yes, but before we eat," Elena wheeled closer and placed her hands on her knees. "I want to try something." Aurora hopped off the couch. "Okay." She knelt and placed her hands on Elena's legs again. This time, Eleanor closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and focused all her willpower on her feet. A rush of warmth shot through her legs, and suddenly her right foot moved, not just a twitch, it lifted a full inch off the footrest. Eleanor gasped, tears filling her eyes. "Oh my God." Aurora grinned from ear to ear. "You're getting better." Eleanor laughed through the tears. "You're a little miracle worker." But before she could say more, a loud bang echoed from outside. Aurora jumped, her eyes wide. Eleanor quickly wheeled to the front window and peered out. A car had backfired near the gate, but there was also a man standing there again. Samuel Kane. He was back. And this time he wasn't alone. Another man stood beside him, pointing toward the house, saying something Eleanor couldn't hear. Eleanor's chest tightened. "Go to the back room," she whispered to Aurora, "now." Aurora didn't argue. She ran down the hallway, her small feet pattering against the hardwood floor. A moment later, the doorbell rang, loud and insistent. Eleanor rolled to the door but didn't open it. "What do you want?" she called through the intercom. "Judge Whitmore," Kane's voice came harder this time. "We need to speak with the girl, it's a matter of her safety." "She's safe here," Eleanor said sharply. "Whatever business you have, you can speak to her guardian." "That's the problem," Kane said, his tone lowering. "Her mother is missing and she's in danger." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "She told me her mother is sick," Eleanor replied carefully. "That's not true," Kane said. "Her mother disappeared from the hospital 2 weeks ago. She's been on the run with the girl ever since. Please, we just need to see her." Eleanor hesitated. She wanted to protect Aurora, but if her mother really was missing. Something crashed from the back room, making Eleanor jump. She spun her wheelchair around and wheeled down the hall as fast as she could. Aurora was gone. The window was open, curtains flapping in the breeze. "Aurora," Eleanor shouted. No answer. Panic surged through her chest. She wheeled to the back door, heart racing. Outside, she spotted a flash of green coat darting through the trees beyond the estate. The girl was running. Eleanor cursed under her breath, her hands gripping the wheels until her palms burned. She couldn't go after her, not fast enough. And then something inside her snapped. She stood up. It wasn't graceful, her legs shook violently and she gripped the doorframe to keep from falling, but she was standing. Tears streamed down her face as she took 2 trembling steps out onto the patio. "Aurora," she cried again, her voice breaking. But the girl was gone, swallowed by the woods. And when Eleanor turned back toward the front of the house, she saw Kane and his companion forcing the gate open. This was no casual investigation anymore. They were coming. That night, Eleanor sat alone by the fire, her legs propped up on a footstool. They ached, but it was the most wonderful pain she'd ever felt. She had stood, she had walked. But Aurora was still gone. And the 2 men had been lurking near the estate all afternoon, waiting. Eleanor's mind churned with questions. Why did Aurora run? Why lie about her mother? And what exactly was Kane not telling her? One thing was clear, this was bigger than a hungry child looking for food. This was a storm. And Eleanor Whitmore, federal judge, sworn upholder of the law, was right in the middle of it. As the fire crackled and shadows danced along the walls, Eleanor made a vow. "I will find you, Aurora," she whispered, "and I will protect you no matter what it costs me." Because for the first time in 8 years, Eleanor Whitmore had something worth fighting for. And she wasn't about to lose it. Rain lashed against the windows of the Whitmore mansion the next evening, but Eleanor didn't notice. She sat in her study, staring at the security cameras, waiting. Aurora hadn't returned. Eleanor had sent her caretaker away hours earlier under the excuse of needing quiet. In truth, she didn't want anyone else involved. This had gone far beyond a simple act of kindness. The gate buzzer rang. She wheeled to the monitor. Samuel Kane stood there again, his coat dripping, his expression unreadable. Eleanor pressed the intercom. "If you're here to threaten me again, Mr. Kane, you can turn right around." "I'm not here to threaten you," Kane said calmly. "I just want to talk." Eleanor hesitated, then pressed the gate release. When Kane stepped into the grand hallway, his sharp eyes swept the room, taking in the polished portraits and shelves of law books. "You have a nice home," he said quietly. "State your business," Eleanor said, wheeling closer. Kane exhaled, running a hand through his wet hair. Judge Whitmore, you're a woman who believes in truth, so let me give it to you straight. That girl, Aurora, is not safe. She's the daughter of a whistleblower who went missing after exposing a major corruption scandal. Someone powerful is after her. Alina's eyes narrowed. And who exactly is after her? Kane's jaw tightened. People who don't want her mother's evidence to see the light of day. If they find the girl, they will use her to get to her mother, or worse. Alina's stomach dropped. You mean they would harm a child? I wish I could say no, Kane replied grimly. But yes, that's why I've been looking for her. I'm trying to get her into protective custody. Alina's legal mind raced. She'd presided over dozens of high-profile corruption cases. She knew what protective custody meant: a safe house, government monitoring, a life on the run. And you expect me to just hand her over? Alina asked sharply. If you care about her, yes, Kane said. Because the longer she's out here on her own, the closer the people looking for her will get. Alina turned away, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. Part of her wanted to believe Kane. His story had the ring of truth, but something in his eyes, something cold, made her hesitate. She ran from you, Alina said finally. If you're really here to protect her, why would she run? Kane's jaw worked. Because she doesn't trust anyone. Her mother told her to hide and she's just doing what she was told. Alina turned back to face him, her blue-gray eyes hard. Leave my property, Mr. Kane. Judge. I said leave, Alina snapped. If what you say is true, then I will find her and bring her to you myself. But you will not stalk my house or frighten her. For a long moment Kane just looked at her, then he nodded slowly. Very well, but I hope you understand, every hour counts. If you wait too long, we may not get to her in time. He turned and walked out into the storm, leaving Alina alone with her racing thoughts. That night, Alina sat by the fire again, her legs propped on the ottoman. She closed her eyes and tried to summon the warmth Aurora's hands had given her. And then, as if summoned by thought, the door creaked open. Aurora stood there, soaked to the bone, shivering violently. Oh, thank God, Alina breathed, wheeling quickly to her side. Where have you been? I've been worried sick. Aurora's lips trembled. I was hiding. I saw those men again. They followed me all the way to the park. Alina's heart clenched. She guided the girl inside, wrapped her in a blanket and sat her near the fire. They say they want to protect you, Alina said gently. Aurora's head snapped up, her eyes wide. They're lying, she cried. Mama said never to trust them. She said if they find me, they'll make her disappear forever. Alina's throat tightened. Your mother, is she alive? Aurora nodded slowly. She's hiding. She said she has papers that can put bad people in jail. That's why they want to find her. Alina's mind whirred. This was bigger than she thought. This was organized, dangerous. She knelt beside Aurora, ignoring the pain in her legs. Listen to me, if we're going to keep you safe, we have to be careful. No more running into the woods alone, no more hiding in the rain. You stay here with me. Aurora's lower lip quivered. But what if they come? Alina took her small hands in hers. Then we fight together. Aurora blinked at her. You can fight. Alina smiled faintly. You'd be surprised what I can do. And then for the first time she stood. Aurora gasped, her eyes huge. You can walk. Not well, Alina admitted, gripping the mantle for support, but I will get stronger, and I will not let anything happen to you. Aurora's face broke into the brightest smile Alina had ever seen. I knew you could do it. Alina hugged her tight, her heart swelling. But even as they sat together by the fire, Alina knew they were running out of time. Because Kane was right about one thing: every hour counted. And soon someone else would come looking. Someone who might not knock on the door. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the Whitmore estate damp and eerily quiet. Judge Alina Whitmore stood in the hallway, leaning against her wheelchair for balance. Her legs were weak, but she had walked from her bedroom to the front window, a distance she hadn't crossed on her own in nearly a decade. Aurora followed her closely, clutching her blanket like a shield. Are they gone? The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alina scanned the driveway, no sign of Samuel Kane or the second man, but she didn't relax. They may be gone for now, Alina said, but they will be back, and next time we must be ready. Aurora's brow furrowed. Ready how? Alina wheeled back toward the study, determination setting her jaw. Ready to protect you and whatever secrets your mother is hiding. If those papers are as important as you say, then we need to keep them safe until the right people can see them. Aurora hesitated, then whispered. Mama gave me something before she left, she said, to keep it safe. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small tin box, dented and scratched from years of use. Inside, folded carefully, was a single envelope sealed with wax. Alina's breath caught. What's inside? Aurora shook her head. I don't know, Mama said I should only give it to someone I trust. Alina's hand hovered over the envelope, her legal mind spinning. If these were the documents Kane mentioned, proof of corruption, then they could be dangerous to possess. But she closed the tin box gently and placed it back in Aurora's hands. We'll keep it here, somewhere safe. Aurora nodded, visibly relieved. That night, as Alina was helping Aurora get ready for bed, a strange noise echoed through the house, the faint sound of metal scraping against metal. Alina froze. Then came another sound, a click. Someone was trying to pick the lock. Her blood turned to ice. Get under the bed, Alina whispered urgently. Aurora obeyed instantly, crawling beneath the heavy wooden frame. Alina grabbed the nearest object, a fireplace poker, and gripped it tightly. Her legs trembled, but she forced herself upright. The front door creaked open. Footsteps. 2 sets. Alina's heart pounded. A shadow moved across the hallway, then another. They were inside. She pressed herself against the wall, forcing her breath to stay quiet. The intruders moved through the living room, whispering to each other. She's here somewhere, one voice hissed. Alina's fear turned to anger. This was her house, her sanctuary. And they were threatening the child she had sworn to protect. Slowly, painfully, she stepped forward, gripping the poker like a sword. When the first intruder rounded the corner, Alina swung with every ounce of strength she had left. The metal struck his arm with a sickening crack and he yelped, stumbling back. The second man lunged toward her, but Alina jabbed the poker toward his chest, forcing him to retreat. For a few tense seconds the mansion echoed with shouts, scuffling, and the sound of something glass shattering. And then the front door slammed. They were gone. Alina collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Her legs were shaking violently, but she was still standing. Aurora crawled out from under the bed, her eyes huge with fear. Are you okay? Alina dropped the poker and knelt, pulling the girl into her arms. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling. Yes, darling, I'm okay, but we can't stay here anymore, it's not safe. Aurora clung to her. Where will we go? Alina's mind raced. She knew what had to be done, even if it went against every instinct. She had to distrust Kane. We're going to find the one man who might be able to protect you, she said finally, but we will do it on our terms. The next morning, Alina packed a small bag, legal papers, some money, and the tin box with Aurora's envelope inside. Aurora watched silently as Alina maneuvered her wheelchair toward the garage. You're driving? Aurora asked, astonished. Alina smiled grimly. Yes, and you, little one, are going to be my co-pilot. Aurora giggled nervously. But Alina's heart was heavy. They were leaving the mansion, the home that had been her prison for 8 years and her refuge for one short, miraculous week. As they drove through the iron gates and out onto the open road, Alina glanced at Aurora. You ready? She asked. Aurora nodded. Yes, are you? Alina's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. I've been ready for 8 years. But as the mansion disappeared in the rearview mirror, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Because whoever had broken into her house would not stop. They would come again. And next time they might not leave empty-handed. The Whitmore mansion was a shrinking shadow in the distance as Alina guided her sleek black sedan down the winding road out of Millbrook. Aurora sat in the passenger seat, hugging the tin box close to her chest. The early morning fog wrapped around the car like a ghostly shroud. Where are we going? Aurora asked softly. Alina's grip tightened on the wheel. To a place I haven't been in years, she said. An old friend of mine, someone I trust. She didn't add the part that made her stomach twist. If her instincts were wrong, they might be walking straight into danger. They drove for nearly 2 hours, stopping only once for gas. Alina felt every bump in the road in her still aching legs, but she welcomed the pain. It meant she was alive. It meant she was healing. Aurora barely spoke, staring out the window as if expecting a car to follow them. When they finally reached the outskirts of a small rural town, Alina turned down a narrow lane lined with tall pines. At the very end of the lane stood a farmhouse, small, plain, but sturdy. Alina parked and exhaled. "We're here." "Who lives here?" Aurora asked. "A man named Peter Lawson," Alina said. "He used to be one of the best federal prosecutors in the state before he retired. If there's anyone who can help us figure out what's going on, it's him." Aurora nodded slowly, still clutching the tin box. Peter answered the door almost immediately. He was a tall man in his 70s with a kind face and a shock of white hair. His eyes widened when he saw Alina standing leaning on her cane but on her own 2 feet. "Alina Whitmore," he said, astonished. "Good Lord, woman, you're walking." "Sort of," Alina said with a faint smile. "Peter, I need your help." His expression turned serious at once. "Come in." They sat at his kitchen table while Alina explained everything: the girl, the envelope, the men at her door, even the break-in. Peter listened in silence, his brows furrowed. When Alina finished, he nodded slowly. "This is bigger than I thought," he said. "I heard rumors about a whistleblower last year, someone who had dirt on half the city council and 2 state senators. If what's in that envelope is real, you're both in a lot of danger." Aurora slid the tin box across the table. "Mama said to only give this to someone good," she whispered. Peter broke the wax seal carefully and unfolded the papers inside. His face paled as he read. "This is it," he said finally. "This is the kind of evidence that could put powerful people behind bars for decades. No wonder they're after her." Aurora's eyes filled with tears. "Will they hurt Mama?" Peter's jaw tightened. "They might have already tried. These people don't play fair." Alina reached across the table and took Aurora's hand. "Then we can't let them win." Peter nodded. "I have a contact in the Justice Department, someone I trust completely. If we can get this evidence to him, we might be able to put Aurora and her mother into a real witness protection program, but you have to be careful, if they find out where you're going." He didn't finish the sentence, but they all understood. That night, Alina lay awake in the small guest room Peter had given her. The farmhouse was quiet, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Sometime after midnight, she heard it, the low rumble of a car engine outside. She crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. Headlights. A black SUV sat idling at the end of the driveway. Her stomach dropped. She hurried to Aurora's room and gently shook her awake. "Darling, get up, we have to go." Aurora blinked sleepily. "Now." "Yes, now." They gathered the envelope and Peter met them at the back door, his face grim. "They found you," he said simply. "Take my truck, I'll buy you some time." "No," Alina protested. "Peter, I can't." "Go," Peter said firmly. "I'm not helpless, Ellie. I've dealt with men like this before, but you have a child to protect." Alina's throat tightened. She gripped Peter's hand. "Be careful." Then she and Aurora slipped out the back door and into the night. They were halfway down the county road when the SUV's headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Aurora gasped. "They're following us." Alina's hands clenched the steering wheel. "Hold on," she said, her voice steady. She pressed the accelerator. The truck roared forward, the wind whipping through the cracked window. The SUV kept pace. Alina's heart pounded. She hadn't driven like this in years, not since before the accident, but adrenaline sharpened her senses. When she spotted a dirt road veering sharply into the woods, she yanked the wheel and turned. Gravel sprayed behind them as the truck bounced violently, branches scraping the sides. "Are we going to be okay?" Aurora cried. "Yes," Alina said through gritted teeth. "I will not let them take you." They didn't stop until they were miles away, the truck caked with mud, Alina's hands shaking on the wheel. Aurora crawled across the seat and hugged her tightly. "You didn't let them catch us." Alina's breath shuddered out. "No," she said softly, "and I never will." But deep down she knew this wasn't over. Peter had been right, this was bigger than them. And if they didn't act fast, they could lose everything. As dawn broke over the treetops, Alina made a decision. "We're going to finish this," she said, her voice like iron. "We're going to take this evidence straight to the people who can do something about it." Aurora's small face lit up with fierce determination. "Then let's go." The city skyline shimmered ahead of them as Alina gripped the steering wheel, her jaw set. Aurora sat beside her, the tin box clutched tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken for nearly an hour, but Alina could feel the girl's eyes on her, trusting, expectant, as though Alina were the last safe place left in the world. And maybe she was. They pulled into a quiet parking garage near the courthouse just as the sun was rising. Alina parked the muddy truck and sat for a moment, breathing hard. "Are we really going inside?" Aurora asked softly. "Yes," Alina said, "we have to. This is the safest place left and the most public. If Kane wants to silence us, he'll have to do it in front of every reporter in the city." Aurora nodded slowly, her tiny fingers tightening around the box. The courthouse was nearly empty at this early hour, but Alina's presence turned heads as she walked in, tall, proud, leaning on her cane but moving with purpose. Word traveled quickly. Within minutes, cameras were flashing, reporters whispering, "Judge Whitmore is here, Judge Whitmore is walking." But Alina didn't stop. She marched straight into the central hall and asked for the duty clerk. "I need a federal marshal and an emergency hearing," she said, "now." The clerk blinked but obeyed. Alina Whitmore's voice still carried authority, even more so now that she was standing on her own 2 feet. Minutes later, they were ushered into a small hearing room. A federal magistrate appeared, groggy but curious. Alina placed the tin box on the table. "This," she said, her voice clear, "is evidence of corruption at the highest levels of this state. It names names, it details bribes, embezzlement, and murder for hire plots, and the men behind it have been hunting this child to keep her mother silent." The magistrate's face hardened. "Where is the mother?" Alina hesitated. "We believe she may have been taken." Aurora's lip trembled. "We have to help her," she said in a small voice. The magistrate nodded gravely. "You did the right thing bringing this here. I'll have this entered into protective custody and notify the Justice Department immediately." Alina exhaled. For a brief, dizzying moment, relief washed over her. And then the door slammed open. Kane strode in, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. The bailiff tried to stop him, but Kane flashed a badge. "Private security," he barked. "I'm here to collect something that doesn't belong to her." Aurora shrank back, clutching the box. Alina stepped in front of her, Kane planted firmly. "You're not taking anything," she said, her voice like a gavel striking wood. Kane smirked. "You think you can stop me, Judge?" Alina straightened to her full height, every ounce of the old courtroom fire blazing in her eyes. "I don't think," she said coldly, "I know." The magistrate slammed his hand on the desk. "This is a federal court. You are trespassing and interfering with an active proceeding. Bailiff, detain them." Chaos erupted. The bailiff and 2 marshals appeared, but Kane's men resisted. For a tense moment, Alina thought there would be a full-on brawl in the hearing room. And then Aurora's voice cut through the noise. "Stop," she cried. Everyone froze. Aurora stepped forward, trembling but fierce. "You don't have to hurt each other," she said, staring straight at Kane. "You can just let us go. You don't want to do this." For a long moment, something shifted in Kane's face. His sneer faltered, his hand lowering slightly. Alina saw it that strange. Unexplainable pull Aurora seemed to have over people. Kane blinked, looking suddenly tired. "She's just a kid," one of his men muttered. Kane's jaw worked, and then, without another word, he turned on his heel and stalked out, his men following. The room was silent. Aurora turned to Alina, tears brimming in her eyes. "Did we win?" Alina knelt, no longer out of necessity but choice, and cupped Aurora's face in her hands. "Yes," she said softly, "we won, but we still have to find your mother." Hours later, after statements were taken and federal protection was arranged for Aurora, Alina found herself outside the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters. Cameras flashed as she stood tall, the morning light catching her silver hair. "Judge Whitmore," one reporter called, "how are you walking again?" Alina smiled faintly. Let's just say I had a little help from a very brave girl. Aurora peeked out from behind her, shy but smiling. The crowd melted at the sight. But even as Alina basked in the relief of having done the right thing, she knew the fight wasn't over. Aurora's mother was still missing. And somewhere out there, Kane and his men were regrouping. Alina straightened, her cane tapping against the courthouse steps. If they think this is over, she murmured, they don't know me very well. Aurora slipped her hand into hers. Then let's go get Mama, she said firmly. And for the first time in years, Alina Whitmore felt unstoppable. The safe house was quiet that night, but Alina couldn't sleep. Aurora had finally dozed off on the couch, curled under a blanket with the empty sandwich plate beside her. She looked so small, so fragile, and yet she had faced down men twice her size that very morning without flinching. Alina stared out the window, her hand resting on the cane she now used more out of habit than necessity. Tomorrow, she promised herself, tomorrow we will find your mother. At dawn, the federal marshals returned with news. We got a lead, one of them said grimly. There's an abandoned warehouse outside Millbrook. Witness spotted Kane's vehicle there late last night. Alina's stomach tightened. We're going, she said. The marshal hesitated. Ma'am, with respect, you're not law enforcement. I was a federal judge for 30 years, Alina cut in sharply. I'm coming. Aurora, now awake, slid off the couch and stood beside Alina. So am I, she said. The warehouse sat at the edge of town, quiet except for the crows circling overhead. Alina stepped out of the truck, her breath misting in the early morning chill. Aurora held tightly to her hand. The marshals moved in first, weapons drawn. Clear, one of them shouted. They found her in a back room, thin, bruised but alive. Mama, Aurora cried, breaking free of Alina's grasp and running into her mother's arms. The woman clutched her daughter, sobbing into her tangled hair. Alina felt a lump rise in her throat. For 8 years she had lived in a body that didn't work, shutting the world out, convinced nothing good could happen again. And now here she stood, witnessing a reunion that was nothing short of a miracle. But the moment didn't last long. Kane appeared in the doorway, a pistol in his hand. Step back, he snarled. Aurora's mother shielded her daughter instinctively. Alina stepped forward, cane in hand, heart pounding, but she didn't flinch. Kane, she said, her voice calm, almost pitying. You've already lost. The evidence is in federal custody. Your men are in jail. You can walk out now and face trial, or you can destroy what little chance you have left. Kane's hand shook. For a moment, Alina thought he might actually pull the trigger. And then Aurora spoke. You don't have to be this man, she said softly. Something shifted in Kane's face. His jaw trembled, his eyes darting between Aurora and Alina, and then, slowly, he lowered the gun. The marshals moved in, cuffing him. Alina exhaled shakily. 2 weeks later, the courthouse was packed to the rafters. This time, Alina wasn't the judge on the bench, she was the witness. She told the jury everything about Kane's threats, about the night Aurora came to her gate asking for a sandwich, about the way that small act of kindness had turned into something much bigger. And when the verdict was read guilty on all counts, Alina felt something inside her finally settle. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed her again. What happens now, Judge Whitmore? A reporter asked. Alina looked down at Aurora, who was holding her mother's hand. What happens now? She repeated thoughtfully. Now I keep walking, and I keep helping this little girl and her family get back on their feet, because miracles don't stop the day they begin, they grow if we let them. Aurora grinned up at her. And maybe we can make more sandwiches. Alina laughed, really laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years. Yes, Aurora, she said warmly, let's make more sandwiches. That night back at the Whitmore estate, Alina sat at her kitchen table. Aurora and her mother were upstairs in the guest rooms, safe and warm for the first time in months. Alina looked down at the plate in front of her, a simple turkey sandwich, just like the first night. She took a slow bite, savoring it. For 8 years she had believed her life was over. But one small girl had proved her wrong and given her more than her legs back. She had given her a reason to live again. Outside, the autumn wind rustled the leaves. For the first time in nearly a decade, Alina didn't feel trapped in her own home. She felt free. And as she turned off the kitchen light, she whispered into the quiet house. "Thank you, Aurora." Because it had started with a sandwich. But it ended with a miracle.